Hello, my name is James King and I'm a digital product designer from London. I gave a talk at last year's EE conference about exploring cooperative pooling and sharing schemes of businesses. This idea is directly inspired by Ollie Peters and Alex Adamou's paper, The Ergodicity Solution to the Cooperation Puzzle, as well as The Farmer's Fable by Mark Ellsberg. I'm interested in this because I run a small business called Science Practice, which I think could benefit from cooperative pooling and sharing with other businesses to grow faster. In my talk last year, I managed to convince myself at least that this could work in theory. This year's talk is a step towards trying to make this work in practice. My goal is to find a handful of other companies to pool and share revenue with. Now, I've got friends who also own small businesses. On a couple of occasions, I've taken them out for coffee and tested the water with them. But after explaining what this is all about, I have the feeling that I'm coming across a bit like this. So I have two main challenges. Firstly, I need to work out the practical details of how companies could pool and share revenue. Secondly, I need to develop an explanation that helps other company owners visualize the potential benefit. My talk is called Companies as Bets. Investors and founders often think of companies as bets. The bet goes like this. If we invest time and capital in this company, will the value of the company grow and give us a return on our investment? There's a whole industry of venture finance that is built around facilitating these types of bets. It has a whole lexicon of conventions and concepts. There are seed investments, Series A, Series B, C, cap tables, runways, and of course exits. As an industry, venture finance has helped create a lot of innovative companies that wouldn't exist without the upfront investment of these types of bets. But in order to make these types of bets, you need one thing, capital. So let's call them capital bets. There's another type of bet that all companies make, whether they're large or small, and which isn't normally thought of as betting in the same way. Let's call these operational bets. To explain, let's look at a fictional wholesale bakery called Saffron Park. Saffron Park supplies restaurants, hotels, and cafes all across the city with fresh pastries, bread, and cakes. Here is Saffron Park's profit and loss statement over a single quarter. We can distill it into three key numbers. We can total up the cost of goods sold, the operating expenses, and the taxes to create an overall costs figure for the quarter. Then there's the total revenue, and finally the net profit. Now let's visualize these numbers over the period of a quarter. First, there's the costs. Then there's the revenue. And next, there's the net profit. Viewing these figures in this way, as we do on a profit and loss statement, focuses on the additive relationship between them. If revenue is less than our expenses, then we make a loss. If revenue is greater than our expenses, then we make a profit. But there's another way to look at the same figures through the lens of a bet. If we do so, then the ratio between our expenses and our revenue becomes the return on our bet. If this ratio is greater than 1, then our return is positive. And if this ratio is less than 1, then our return is negative. This quarterly bet has an important characteristic. It repeats. The output of one quarter feeds into the next. The rate of return varies from quarter to quarter, of course, often for reasons outside our control. Here, perhaps a rival bakery attracted one of Saffron Park's major customers. Here, perhaps one of their existing customers decided to double their order. If you collect up the quarterly returns over time and calculate an average, then you arrive at a number. For these 4 quarters, this average happens to be 1.23 times. If this average rate of return were to extend into the future, then you might expect to see a nice exponential growth in equity. And that's exactly what you would see if there was no variation in the average rate of return. But as the variability of the return increases, then the growth rate decreases. This is true even if the average rate of return remains at a fixed 1.23 times. For a company like Saffron Park, there are 2 ways to improve the growth rate. You can increase the average rate of return, or you can reduce the variability of these returns. And this brings us back to our 2 types of bet. There are capital bets, which are spending on the business to improve its capacity to make money. These are one-shot bets. You make the investment once and hopefully the value of the company increases as a result. They're classed as CapEx or capital expenditure. This means that the money flows into building or buying assets that the company then goes on to own. Operational bets are spending by the business in order to keep operating. They're repeat bets where the output of one period feeds into the next. And they're classed as OPEX or operational expenditure. This means that the money is flowing out of the company. Capital bets have the goal of increasing the capacity of the business to make money, and if they're successful, then they are effectively raising the average rate of return. Operational bets are the price of doing business. They're not optional, but if you can reduce the variability on the rate of return, then your company will grow faster. So if you want to grow your business and you have capital to spare, then you can choose to make a capital bet. But if you don't have a lot of capital lying around, then you need to focus on reducing the variability in your return rate. Here's how you can do that. To explain, let's introduce two more fictional companies. There's Brookgate Legal Services and Hickory Home Renovation and Interior Design. These three companies all agree to pool their revenue. Here is each company's performance over 16 quarters. You can see that each has a different average return rate, but all have quite high variability in their returns. These three companies decide to cooperate with each other to reduce this variability. Here's how it works. Each quarter, the companies operate separately, getting on with their business. Saffron and Hickory both happen to have made profits this quarter, but Brookgate Legal Services must have had a quieter quarter than normal and have made a bit of a loss. At the end of each quarter, the three companies pool the revenue that they make and then share it evenly between them. This evens out the rate of return for all three companies. You can see that as they pool their revenue together, they've raised the collective growth rate. By the end of the period of 16 quarters, the pool is outperforming all three companies individually. Just in case you think that these three sets of companies' returns have been cherry-picked, here are 500 companies. On the right is a histogram of their value at the end of the 16 quarters. If I select two companies at random to cooperate in a pool, then you can see the histogram of these pools starting to shift upwards. If I increase the pool size to 3, 4, 5, then you can see the overall wealth increasing and consolidating. So I hope I've managed to convince you that there's some promise here. Now I'd just like to talk about a few design details. I think I have two main principles when it comes to designing a pool. The first is that pooling shouldn't require any shared ownership of the individual companies. Each company should remain independent from the others. The second is that I think pooling should be based on OPEX and CapEx should be excluded. Different companies have very different needs when it comes to capital expenditure. And while it is possible to amortize this over a period, it's not really fair for companies that don't need to make the same expenditure. They'll be effectively subsidizing the ones that do. The next principle is that it should be very easy to join and leave a pool. Being a member of a pool should be mutually beneficial for all, but if a member decides that they no longer want to participate, it should be easy for them to leave. Ideally, the members of a pool would be very similar in terms of the amount that they spend on operational expenses each quarter. However, it should be possible to accommodate companies of different sizes in the pool. One approach would be to agree that all companies pool an equal amount of their costs. No company pools more than any of the others. Another, though, would be to ensure that no individual company makes up more than a specific percentage of the pool. Any operational expenses they make above this doesn't get pooled. Revenue is then pooled proportionally amongst the companies. Lastly, a member of a pool may outgrow the pool that they're in. This would happen if the time average growth rate was significantly higher than the pool's average. In this case, the pool member might be able to find another pool where the members have a higher growth rate that matches theirs. So as I mentioned, my goal is to eventually start a pool with other companies like mine and see if it works. My next step will be to publish and explain a blog post online, featuring some of the interactive visualizations I presented in this talk. I'd appreciate feedback from the EE community, especially if you spot a mistake or a flaw in my thinking. Thank you for listening.